welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today is longtime listener, poet laureate, and Taya master Anne-Marie Young. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. And Anne-Marie, first of all, welcome back. And we were so glad to find out before the show that you had such a great time with your family in Rome. I mean, first of all, how bad can it be to go to Rome? I mean, that's really rough.
It's torture, but I had to eat some gorgeous food and see a beautiful city in lovely weather. Yeah, it was hellish.
I mean, somebody has to do it. So I'm glad that you were able to volunteer and help out in that way. That was really good of you.
Took one for the team.
Yes, absolutely. And we're so proud of you. But it is great to have you back. We missed you for the last few weeks.
It's good to be back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we're joined today by Allison Yamamoto, who has, she's been kind of regaling us about the novelties of the New York Marathon leading up to our conversation here. But we're really not going to go run a marathon. Instead, we're going to be talking about nutritional issues and various women's issues and so forth. And so we're going to kind of try to segue over into that. But first of all, welcome, Allison, to the program. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yes, definitely. If anyone is interested in some New York City Marathon stories, I'm more than happy to take that offline with you because I was just recounting my own experiences with them. I didn't run it, but it is definitely a unique experience for anyone who's interested or who's actually done it. But it was this past weekend, which is why we were on that topic.
Yeah, anything having to do with New York City is an experience. Anything having to do with a marathon is an experience. Put those two things together, you have an experience. You have a real experience.
All caps.
All caps, that's right. Hashtag experience. Okay. So, yeah, good stuff. So anyway, tell people, we got to kind of introduce them to you and let them know, what brought you onto the program and so forth. So tell them how you get to where you are today.
Yeah, so I'm Allison, super excited to be here. And as you might have guessed, I live in New York City, but I am here today because I am the founder and CEO of a company called Ally, where we have really focused on helping especially active women feel really empowered in their bodies and their health, especially around their hormonal health and around the relationship with food and exercise. And I think a lot of times what I've seen in practice is women intentionally or not making mistakes when it comes to navigating their diet and navigating their nutrition and exercise in ways that might actually be harmful to their goals. And so that's really what and I'm including myself in that area where I also made similar mistakes in my own past. And that's what inspired me to create a program that has now just helped women for several years. And it's an area that I'm really passionate about. So always love talking about it and sharing the things that I've learned over time.
Which is a great thing. As you were saying that, particularly about mistakes that women have made, I immediately in my head translated to, and men too. And because I'm one of them. and then the second thought that came to my mind was, it's not all that hard to make mistakes because, to be quite honest, the more that I've been learning about nutrition and food and so forth, the more I'm realizing just how much gray area there is. I mean, we have professional nutritionists, we have professional dietitians, we have alternative medical practitioners who are helping with various nutritionally related cures and so forth. But when you really look at it, despite all of the information that's out there, it's amazing how much gray area there is, how much that there's actually disagreement about, well, this nutrient does this, well, no, it actually does that, it does the opposite. A lot of stuff like that. It's not surprising that we make mistakes, that we get it wrong at times.
Yeah, and I think the thing that you mentioned that is so accurate is that there's almost too much information, because then what ends up happening is sort of this combination of things. One is it's easy to take on advice and apply it to yourself because you think it sounds attractive or you think it sounds like they're promising something that would be amazing, and then not realize that that is actually something that isn't relevant to you specifically or to the person, your persona, your activity level, your gender. All these other things are factors that come into play about how it's going to impact you. And then the other thing is that there's so much language that we use when it comes to our nutrition that can be really fear-based, that it can become a situation where you're feeling really guilty, or you feel like, you're not seeing the gray area that you're mentioning, and feeling like you actually have to adhere to all of these various recommendations or advice or rules that people are doling out, because they're doing it under the premise of this is what you have to do in order to be healthy, or else it'll kill you. Like all this very extremist language that can be easy to adopt and fall into the trap of feeling either confused or feeling like you have to optimize just in order to prevent these really fearful outcomes that people are talking about when it comes to the nutrition.
Which is a big deal because one of our major topics around here is mindset and law of attraction and intention and all that kind of thing. And if your mindset is on a focus that is going to be counterproductive, guess what? You're going to produce counterproductive. And that's especially going to be true in this arena, I would think.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that it's something that we don't often think about when we're thinking about nutrition, because sometimes it feels like such a functional thing where if someone gives us the advice of this food group is going to kill you and you should never do it, then we start adopting this mindset where you're right, we're fueling our bodies out of fear, and we're not fueling our bodies out of a love and appreciation that we have about not only our bodies, but also our experiential lives and the connection that we have. And I think that it undermines the amount of purposes that food can serve in our lives. And of course, I'm all for longevity and health and really trying to, use fuel as a way to promote those good health outcomes. But I also think that there's not enough conversation about how, to your point, the stress that can be induced from having to navigate food in a way that is very fear-based, a way that is very guilt-based, is something that can feel really unsustainable as well. And I think that, to your point, it is really easy to fall into these traps where we are making mistakes because it is feeling like there's a lot on the line if we mess it up or we do something wrong. And I think that that's something that, to your point, it really reflects back when we feel like there's a sense of guilt or a sense of restriction or a sense of rigidity around food, that can impact our health in other ways when we're too narrow-minded about what health involves. It's not just exercise. It's not just nutrition. There's a whole host of how we're connecting to others, how we are showing up around stress, and taking that more holistic view can sometimes allow us to be a little bit more flexible and forgiving of ourselves when it comes to navigating our nutrition.
Which is important because another thing that can happen is overwhelmment. I mean, you start diving into some of the stuff and then you start trying to figure out how to implement it in your own life. It can truly be overwhelming just trying to figure out how to make the thing work.
Right. And I think that that is one of the core tenets of what inspired me around the work that I do with people, is that there are some things that when you really strip it down to the fundamentals are quite important, and they will impact how you feel, your energy levels, your mood, your performance when it comes to anything from academically to cognitively to your athletic performance. And those fundamentals, they're not super complex. And one of the biggest mistakes we can make is take on all of these fringe recommendations that are more like the optimizations on the very fringes of what our nutrition or even our fitness should look like, and focus on those at the expense of making mistakes when it comes to the more foundational aspects. And that's, I think, when, to your point, the overwhelm can occur, which is that there are so many fringe recommendations out there about specific supplements or these random, herbs or whatever it is that we could always include in like our 30-step morning routine that can contribute to that overwhelm. But when we strip it down to like, let's make sure you're getting the foundational basics right, it's not always the most like sexy topics that are going to promise these crazy benefits in like a crazy short amount of time. But those are the things that are the tried and true aspects that whether you're busy, whether you're an athlete, whether you're trying to, you can have a variety of health goals that each that is very individualized per person. But some of those foundational aspects are really applicable across the spectrum.
Interesting that you mentioned the foundational side of it, because for me, that's where a lot of the overwhelmment comes in as well. Even if you identify what person X is telling you is foundational, you can find person Y who says, no, that's not foundational. you're on the
Mhm.
wrong foundation. Trying to
Yeah.
get foundation founded is the hardest part. Like what? Okay, so where is the foundation? Well, it's here. No, actually, it's over here. No, it's here. No, and people become quite, heated about it.
Yeah.
I've been dealing with some minor chronic headaches, which is a relatively new thing for me this past year,
I'm sorry.
and I've been consulting with a naturopath because my MD was useless on the topic. So I went to the naturopath, and she had me making some changes, and I made some variations on what she was recommending because I tried following her path and my headaches got worse. I said, okay, well, I got to shift here. So I went back to some of the things that I knew that worked for me, and I got back to my baseline again. But those things were in one case, it was particularly milk. I'm a milk drinker. She is against milk. She thinks that milk is a really, really bad idea because it has so many negatives associated with it. And I even, this is where it started to get heated. I actually said to her, I think you're kind of milk averse here. And she's got all defensive about that. Oh, I'm not milk averse. And then she gave me all the reasons why you shouldn't drink milk. I mean, it was that kind of a conversation, So here I am dealing with somebody who really is an expert in the field, and I'm dealing with overwhelm and just dealing with her because my experience is proving to be different from what she had in mind. Now, to her credit, by the way, she's a good doctor. I don't want to paint a picture here that she's not. To her credit, she was saying, well, everybody is different, and she started giving me different alternative ideas of where to get the kind of information I was looking for and so forth. So she was doing her job the way she should. But it kind of illustrates, even when you're dealing with somebody who's an expert, you can still get kind of messed up just trying to deal with the fundamentals.
Yeah, and I think that maybe it goes into like how we would define fundamentals, because I think you're 100% right, which is that there are going to be things that are really important to a certain cohort that might not be applicable to another cohort. I think that that's where we can get really lost, is that it's like, oh yeah, was this applicable to me? Is this something that when it's taken into consideration, me as a person, is this going to matter or not? And there are some things when it comes to our holistic health, like sleep or stress management, or how we are thinking about our training and what is going to be a balance between overtraining and like zero training, which is the other extreme, where there are foundational elements that it's worth prioritizing, and it's worth knowing that those are things that we're going to try to incorporate in the toolkit we have around our health. And then to your point around nutrition, there are areas where I think there's the extremes that we see that can be really enticing because of the promises that they recommend. And it is, to your point, worthwhile to understand that we also do have a lot of individuality when it comes to our food, in terms of, each of us have allergies is a perfect example. Like that's an obvious one where there's going to be a lot of differences. There's also cultural norms. There's also like, again, the physiology. So like male versus female is going to matter. And I think that when it comes to our nutrition, to your point on the gray area, when I say foundational aspects, it's mostly about trying to make sure that we are managing energy availability. We're trying to make sure that we're generally trying to support our metabolism, balance our blood sugar. We're not trying to make major restrictions in terms of our diet. And so it's not necessarily the thing of like milk or not milk. It's not necessarily the thing of like, do we want to take this supplement or not? It's more like, when we strip away like all of the noise and just try to get to like the very basics, can we be happy or find consistency in at least the most bare bones of like what makes a good meal? What is going to help us feel really satiated, but also feel energized, but also feel like our blood sugars are being regulated? And I think that when we take that approach, it feels more forgiving in terms of where we can add some individuality. So do we add the milk on this one, or do we not digest any lactose? Like that, I think is where we can.
That was what she was pointing to, was the lactose side of it. And I get that part of the argument. I understand where that comes from. Yeah.
But to your point, like if it works for you, and I think there's also a huge amount of power in being able to understand and feel confident in this works for me. And I'm going to do it because I know that my body responds well to that. And I think that in a world where it's really easy to compare to other people, or to feel like you're questioning what you're doing, or to feel like there's an implication that if you just do this exact same thing that someone else is doing, then you'll get all the exact same outcomes as that person.
Yeah.
That it can be hard to continue to stand your ground and to tune in on, this actually does work for me. No, this doesn't work for me. And I'm going to actually continue to make that choice, even if it's easy to question it based on the things and the noise that are occurring around me. So that's also something that I think it's something that we don't realize, that we kind of have to relearn when we've really inhabited a mindset where we feel like we can't trust our body. And I think then it's not easy to say to someone, okay, just trust your body, like just trust your body. And I think that we can underestimate that when you've lived in a state where you're abiding by the rules, you're abiding by what people are saying, and you're looking externally for what's right or wrong, that it can be a really challenging journey to go back to a state where you can trust your body in the way that you would expect that to feel like and to look like in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thought that comes to me, and this is something that's kind of evolved during my own journey over the last year, where nutrition is concerned, is now in my case, I'm trying to address a negative, a headache, chronic headache situation, which was brand new. I hadn't had that before. And in the process of doing that, I found myself going through stages that I'm pretty sure almost everybody who's dealing with some kind of a chronic issue like that, who's trying to address it nutritionally, runs into. The first stage is you run into all the resistance points, the different people, and you were describing them very nicely. The people who have the different extreme viewpoints, or this is the essential thing. You gotta do this thing. If you don't do this, blah blah blah. It's scaring you to death and all that kind of thing. So you navigate through that first. As you're navigating through that, the next thing that you find, I think, is that you find yourself taking on the responsibility of understanding your own body and understanding your own need and your own process, and learning not just that, but also how what you are fits in to the knowledge base, and where it doesn't fit in, and what you're going to do about that. It's a self-learning process is what I'm finding.
Yeah, I think that's such an eloquent way to articulate that framework, because I can draw an exact parallel to my experiences as an active woman and a lot of the women that I see, which is that a lot of women are seeing advice online that is either weight loss advice or health advice or absolutely essential nutrition advice, and not realizing that, oh, that was actually advice that was based on a study that was done by an older cohort of obese men. And then applying it to themselves because they think it's necessary for them to maintain a certain physique or aesthetic.
Right.
And I think that period of time where you're figuring out and you're learning about your body and about what works for you is super essential. And there are kind of like easy and hard ways to do that. But part of it is, to your point, finding the people that are representing your community, representing how you identify and what your issues are. And for me, that community that I specialize in and serve is women who are active, women that are exercising in any capacity, who are interested in their hormonal health, who are interested in maintaining like good, clear mind, energy levels throughout the day. Their mood isn't super irritable. It's not super low. Like, I think that there's ways that we, especially as women, can navigate our nutrition and not realize that the mistakes that we're making could actually be causing some of the chronic symptoms that we could be experiencing. And especially when we're mismanaging our nutrition in ways that, and this is where I go back to the fundamentals, where we're restricting and either knowingly or not actually under eating intentionally or not, or restricting certain food groups. And that can be what is contributing to brain fog or irritability or low moods, or all the way through to like higher incidence of stress fractures, to menstrual disruptions, to infertility. And so I think that it's one where it is actually really important to be able to feel that sense of empowerment in your body and in who you are and what you're bringing to the table and what you're trying to optimize for. And sometimes, unfortunately, there is noise, and being able to navigate through that and find the sources that are advocating for your community, advocating for speaking from a place where they're speaking to your population is something that can be really empowering.
One thing I think anybody's going to find, I don't care what grouping they find themselves in, they're going to find that the noise increases the more that they dive into it. It's not like the more you dive in, the noise starts to fade away. It gets louder and louder. And you at some point, you have to kind of come up with a strategy for how are you going to stop paying so much attention to the noise,
Yeah.
right? Because otherwise that noise can overwhelm you.
Point.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting because it speaks a lot to where we're getting our information from and what feedback loops we get within those, because I think that there's also a version of some of these feedback loops where a message can become reinforcing.
Mm.
And this is where we underestimate how we can take control of some of the messaging that we're getting. And it's easy to just fall prey to, okay, well, I'm swiping on like maybe it's social media and I'm seeing a bunch of noise from the source, and then reevaluating either A, what am I doing like behaviorally that is creating this feedback loop for me, or who am I engaging with that can be more credible so that I'm finding more people that are giving me that type of feedback versus, oh, maybe what are going to be the right sources to me that don't perpetuate that sense of noise and overwhelm, and reflecting and doing even like maybe an audit of when I get information from this source, how does it make me feel relative to when I get information from this source? And when I try out those recommendations, or when I see someone else who I view as credible, who I view as trustworthy, talking about a similar issue, where does that message align and echo back through a certain chamber? And I think it just speaks a lot to how in some cases we do actually have more control than we think we do over some of the feedback loops we get around the information that we're receiving. And I only speak to this like also from, my own experience as well, where I was aware for a while of the information that I was seeking and getting back, and that in some cases it was making me not feel very good. In like just mentally, it wasn't making me feel good. It was making me feel overwhelmed, or like I had a lot of pressure to like optimize my routine in every single way. And also feeling like I wasn't seeing a lot of people that were representing me and how I identified, like as a woman, as someone who's active. Like it didn't seem like that was necessarily the demographic that they were targeting. And that is sort of when I started to be more proactive. Who in this space do I actually trust? Who in this space do I think is representing that? And then the more that I would actually seek out that type of persona, the more that was also reinforced. And that's when I actually started to see themes. So maybe it is true that you go to this place where it can be overwhelming, and then maybe it takes a little bit more proactivity, a little bit more intentionality. And then that's when you can actually feed in to understand, okay, now I'm going to actually create consistency around who I'm seeing feedback from in areas where I can trust that there's more similarity in the messages make more sense, and they do seem to be speaking to communities that I also resonate with.
Speaking for myself, and this ties into what the original topic of the show was back when I started 12 years ago, the whole law of attraction thing. I look at this kind of experience that we're describing here, and I look at it in terms of how do people tend to go after things, and what they tend to go after is they tend to go after the things they don't want. I don't like feeling this. I don't want to experience that. I don't like this feeling. I don't like this symptom. So I'm going to keep looking for all these things I don't like. And they forget that it's so important to stop doing it at some point and start looking for what the solution is that you want. They're constantly looking for problems. And if you keep looking for problems, you'll find them. Just ask any medical doctor. Just you keep digging, you're going to find a problem. I guarantee it. But until you start looking for the solution, you're not going to find the solution.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that sometimes it can be challenging, especially, and I'm just thinking about my own experiences where the problems are the ones that are noisiest to you. They're the ones that, to your point, you mentioned the chronic headache.
Right.
Like that's what you like, of course, then you're like, well, the solution is solving that I don't have the chronic, like
Yeah.
it's the painkiller, like get rid of this for me. And
And part
so
part of that's actually just the language, like, okay, how am I going to express it to myself? I don't want to focus on the fact that I got headaches all the time. So how do I turn that? Well, I want to feel good all the time. I want to feel healthy. I want to, you try to find different ways of expressing it to yourself so you have some idea of what you're aiming for. Because
yeah.
otherwise you can get stuck in that loop really
Mhm.
easily. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I do feel lucky to be in the space that I'm in because I do think that that's the beauty of the work that I do that's kind of comprehensive in that it takes into consideration not only the nutrition side and the exercise side, but also the psychological elements, the mindset around it, because the reality is that in some instances where you're trying to help someone through how they're relating to food or how they're relating to exercise, so much else comes up in that as well that you end up starting to explore things about stress management. You end up starting to explore things about body image. You end up starting to explore things about perfectionism or the standards that you have for yourself or that black and white mindset or comparing yourself to other people that you see. And that to me is what I've seen has created more lasting change that becomes more of the vitamin based solution versus the painkiller solution, where, yes, you're seeing resolution on some of the issues that you were experiencing. Maybe it was brain fog, maybe you had bloating, maybe you had a disrupted menstrual cycle. But through actually addressing everything more holistically, those other aspects start to come out. Oh, I'm feeling like I'm much less restrictive around food, or I'm feeling I'm a lot more empowered in how I can navigate choices about how I exercise today relative to my energy levels, or how I'm going to nourish myself based on what I know that my body will need, even if that's not the decision that I'm seeing people making around me. And I think that that's what leads to more lasting change as well, and benefits and outcomes in areas where you might not have even expected. And so I guess the parallel that I could draw would be in your example, if suddenly you addressed the chronic headache, but then you also ended up feeling a lot more clear
Mm,
and focused in how you were presenting at work,
mhm.
and you had that like mental clarity, you didn't realize that that was something that you could achieve. And
Yeah.
for me, it's like, so, a client might come to me, they had like a lot, they've been missing your period for a really long time. And the reality of that is that's just a presentation of an underlying issue. And when you address the underlying issue, then it actually shows that, oh, I actually didn't realize that the same thing that might have been causing my missing period was also causing me to feel cold all the time. It was also
Mm,
causing me
mhm.
to feel really low energy. It was causing me to get really irritable a lot of the time. And that by addressing this one thing, instead of just putting a patch on it, like kind of, no pun intended, because sometimes people just give them birth control in that situation, but that doesn't always address that holistic
Mm.
perspective of all these other things that could be causing issues due to the underlying root cause of what's causing that menstrual disturbance. And
So everything's connected. What a shock. Who knew?
all respond to the same, yeah, I know, it's, but I think that's also the beauty of it, is that then once you find that thing and you've decided, I'm going to fix this issue, then once you're working on the right thing, then it opens a lot of doors for other things to feel resolved. And it actually ends up ultimately reducing that overwhelm. So the overwhelm is occurring because of the uncertainty and because of the interest, right, in wanting to find the thing that's actually going to work. But if you already knew it was going to work for sure with certainty, then I think the overwhelm would actually be significantly removed.
Oh, totally.
And especially in the women's health space, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for overwhelm because in areas where we've tried to seek answers and we've tried to seek solutions, it's fallen short. And so then there's overwhelm about, okay, there's all this information. I don't really know what's going to work for me the best. And I think that the work that I get to do with women can be really helpful or it's really rewarding for me because one of the biggest aspects of what we're doing with people is just reducing the overwhelm and saying, we're going to provide you with frameworks that we know are based on studies that were done on women that are shown to actually balance your hormonal health and that aren't going to perpetuate this cycle of restriction. They're not going to perpetuate the cycle of fear when it comes to your body and food and exercise, which is something that is easy to fall into when we feel like we have to do a certain thing in order to look a certain way or in order to prevent death in some extreme cases that we talk about some of the foods that we
Right.
are capable of eating.
So now that we've laid out a lot of this picture in very rapid fashion, I might add, I'm thinking, okay, so what's the audience thinking right now? And that's where I bring Anne Marie in, because she's like a perfect person for representing the audience. So you're the audience today, Anne Marie. What's going through your mind as you're hearing all this?
Oh, I can just relate to everything that's being said here. I've been listening quite interested in it, because just even like today I was watching something and it was like, are you taking cinnamon every day? And then I'm like, so that's the latest thing. It was turmeric, and then it was take olive oil, and what is it? And all my calories are going to be taking all these herbs and spices and actually no real proper food. But I can
What a diet. It's the herb diet.
but I just think there's always some new thing that's the latest craze, and that does invent that overwhelm. And I'm just sort of thinking, as you were talking, Alison, about my own sort of like journey, because I've been up and down my whole life, and I've been to slimming clubs, and I found them yes, you lose your weight, but I don't feel great for it. And I think you're bang on when you say you need to adjust your mindset. You need to take the whole focus just away from what the weight is, what the numbers are. What is your issue with food? What's, like you say, overwhelming you? What are the stories you're telling yourself? And importantly, listening to your body, like you said, is, eating the foods that make you feel better. And I now know that I felt rotten while going through the menopause because I was wolfing down sugar. Well, now I've kind of cut it out and I eat sugar now, and my stomach is in agony. My body doesn't react. So it's listening to those triggers of your body. So I've literally been relating to all of this. And I think what I would like to know, Alison, as a listener, is how do we know what mistakes we're making?
Ooh.
Yes. Yeah. I love that question. So, and I think your story really relates because to your point, I feel like we often go to a place where we end up almost believing that if it doesn't feel hard and if it doesn't feel really, really challenging, that it's not effective. And I think that becomes really unfortunate because then we get to the state where, yes, we might have achieved this specific weight goal or this specific health outcome that we're trying to achieve. But if we don't feel good about it, we don't feel good in our bodies, then maybe that wasn't the right thing and maybe it's not sustainable. And I think that this actually leads to the first mistake, which is that I think that a lot of women vastly underestimate the importance of fueling themselves regularly throughout the day is one very easy example where I think that we become fearful, especially when we've gotten into these yo-yos around dieting, or we feel like we need to do fasting, or all the latest. For a while, intermittent fasting was the biggest trend. And then we feel like, oh, well, we need to kind of hack ourselves and we're really scared around food. We feel like we need to exert that control. And then we kind of normalize this idea of like, yeah, maybe it's good to skip meals. It's good to not eat until a certain time or create restraints around ourselves in these time windows. And the reality is that there's a huge amount of benefit in just eating regularly, balanced things regularly. And it's one of the biggest mistakes I see women making is feeling like they need to skip certain meals or eat really erratically or save things up for later in the day. Or if they have plans and they're going to save things and changing their whole behavior around versus actually investing in their metabolism and trusting that if you feed yourself regular throughout the day, it's better for your metabolism. It's probably going to prevent spikes in cortisol, like early in the morning when you first wake up, there's going to be a natural spike in your cortisol. Getting something in first thing in the morning can also help mitigate some of that, especially if you're going to work out. So if you're going to wake up and you're going to work out and you're not going to fuel at all in those first several hours, then you're going into what we're calling these energy deficits. And as women, especially, we are much more sensitive to going into energy deficits. And I think that we often think of energy deficits in the way that we talk about it in terms of just calories in, calories out, calories in. That's what we hear all the time. And the interesting thing that we don't have to talk about is this concept of energy availability, which is saying, how are we balancing the energy we have available over the course of a day? over the course of a week. It's much more holistically viewed versus like it's our body isn't just a calculator at the end of the day that's saying, oh, calories in, calories out. Great. There's also things that are impacting how we feel about how we're feeling throughout the day. I think that's one mistake. I think another mistake that I often see is women under eating in certain areas because they are restricting or because they think it's bad or because they think they shouldn't be eating it. And that can also be something that can impact how we feel. And so an example of this would be, and I think that it's very specific to people and their relationship with food, again, to your point, on how much that mindset aspect comes into it. But as an example, if a woman has been told their whole life that eating carbs is going to be bad and it's going to cause you to be super dissatisfied with your body, then that is an area where strictly just under eating carbs, like not eating enough carbs, especially if you're active, can be something that can contribute to symptoms like brain fog. And that women especially are typically more sensitive to, like premenopausal women especially are going to be, especially who are active, are going to be more sensitive to an inadequate carb intake. And that can show up symptomatically as an energy deficit, even if you're eating enough from like a caloric perspective. I would say that the last mistake that I see people making, women especially, but I think this can be generalized more to people in general, is the belief that when they're experiencing dissatisfaction with their body or their body confidence, that oftentimes what we exert to immediately is, how can I control my food? How can I control my exercise? Because I now want to have a specific physique. And when I have that physique, I will achieve happiness and body confidence, and it's going to be great. And I think that the mistake that I see in that area, and this is more of like the mindset piece, moving away from the nutrition piece, is that it's actually the confidence piece that we need to focus on. And it's not the body standard piece. And once we shift our mindset there and realize, oh, actually, there are people that are really dissatisfied with their bodies in every body shape. And there's also people that are really, really confident in a very large variety of bodies. And when we focus our energy more there, then it actually liberates us to be able to approach food in a way that is much more sustainable and allows us to permit ourselves to trust, to develop that trust, and to be able to find what works for us in a way that doesn't feel like there's so much riding on it, when we feel like it's our body, but also our confidence and it's our happiness. And it's going to be so much riding and how much control we need to exert. And so I would say that that's also kind of a through line, a big mistake that I see people making as well.
That I can relate to, because I look back now, when I was my lightest as an adult, it was probably my most unhappiest time, because I was so focused on food and I wasn't eating enough and I wasn't going out with friends and stuff because I was so focused on not having those extra calories. I was miserable. I really was. And, you know, life's changed since then. I've got a lot older. But also I think it is that confidence thing. And once you've got that confidence, then it's not about necessarily the figures. You want to get healthy, you want to get stronger. It doesn't have to be about being skinny anymore. You get more contented with yourself.
Yeah, no, I love that. And thank you so much for sharing that story, because I think that'll resonate with a lot of people. And I really resonates with me, especially because I think that you can find yourself in like almost like a rock, between a rock and a hard place, where you've gotten, you know, you mentioned it yourself. You got to a place where you had achieved maybe a body that you were striving for, but then you didn't feel good and you felt like you weren't eating enough, and you could tell, and it didn't feel sustainable. And so then if you don't work on that confidence piece, then you're stuck. You're like, well, if I change and I try to do something that's going to make me feel better, and it might improve my energy levels, and it might bring more life back into my experiences, and all of a sudden I can feel more free and I can feel more connected to people around me, and I don't feel as controlled, like I'm focused on food all the time. But then I'd be occupying a body that I won't be able to sustain or feel like myself in, feel like I've super happy in. And that could be a really challenging place to be. And so I think that that really just hits the nail on the head in terms of, how important it is to work on this alongside some of the nutritional
Mm.
changes, because the reality is, you could have both. You could feel that confidence, and you could also feel the energy and the more flexibility and feeling like you are able to not have to exert so much control around food. And I think that the thing that's also, really interesting is that in the example that I mentioned before about the mistake that women make about skipping meals and fasted training and waking up in the morning and not always fueling themselves, is that when we get to a state where we're doing this chronically, either because we're dieting or because we're going into these like chronic energy deficits, that the chronic stress that results from being physiologically in that state is what our body is then interpreting as like survival mode. And when we're in survival mode, the most ironic thing is that our body therefore is triggered to want to store more fat, because it's saying we don't know when we're going to be fueled again, because well, we're perpetually every single day going into these deficits. That's really scary, and we need to be able to survive. And so I say it's ironic because a lot of the times we're doing that because we think we're doing it to be lean, or we're doing it because it's going to improve our fitness. And in reality, it can be kind of counterintuitive, but allowing ourselves to focus on the energy availability component can actually improve our body's ability to be able to build up that like lean muscle and be able to improve
Mm.
our fitness and take us out of that restrictive mindset, but also get our metabolism working again, which are all good things that we want to happen. And so I think it's this weird shifting of our mindset and thinking about, this kind of goes back to what I was saying about the fundamentals, about what really matters when it comes to women, what really matters when it comes to our nutrition, our exercise, but also body image, our mindset, that can unlock a lot across the spectrum for us.
Let's define terms a little bit here, because we made a lot of really good associations here, particularly where confidence is concerned. I agree totally with what you've been saying there. But let's define what we mean. When we're saying confidence in this context, what are we talking about?
I think it's an interesting question because confidence is something that people is going to vary based on who the person is, in the sense that I think that confidence is really closely tied to self-worth. And so when we're talking about confidence and we're talking about an empowerment, then that could be everything from feeling good and happy and satisfied with yourself and your person, not feeling like you're reliant on something that might be unsustainable for that validation, for your belief that you are enough, for that belief um, and permission that you deserve things that you can have in your life. And so I think that the reason that I say that it's a little bit varied per person is because for some people, they might feel that in order to have that, it hinges on them having a certain aesthetic with their body. It might hinge on them having a certain workout checked off that they've done in the day for them to feel like they have that sense of permission, that they have that sense of fulfillment that they can then use to pursue whatever it is that they want, whether it's like going out for dinner or, being able to reduce their anxiety because they've checked the box on some sort of, workout that they've done that day. And I just say that because when we relate a lot of this back to self-worth, which I think is something that kind of underpins confidence in like the background, that it's helpful to understand where then we're like what void we're trying to fulfill. But I think that confidence also, to your point on definition, can also include things like confidence in your understanding and knowledge in what works for you or what information is credible. And I think that that's another side of it. So there's confidence in yourself, confidence in how you feel, and confidence that you're deserving and that you're worthy. But then there's also confidence that you are clear on what it is that works for you, on what information is credible versus not credible, on what when you make certain decisions, on what outcome that's going to result in, especially when it comes to your nutrition, your fitness. And so I like to say that that's the other side of confidence, because that's also a really critical point. in being able to navigate nutrition and exercise with more what we're saying confidence. Did that answer your question? There's sort of like the two sides. There's like
Yeah,
your
well, I
internal
think we also need to delve a little bit in because as you very clearly presented to us with your answer, confidence is only one of those fundamentals we need to define. We need to define a few more. So let's define a few. I mean, let's define self-worth. You used that one a few times, and that's another one that if it is like the old joke. I mean, if you have it, you know what it is. If you don't have it, you don't know what it is. So how do you define it if you're kind of struggling with the self-worth piece?
Yeah. I think that's so interesting because I feel like sometimes I almost feel like what I've seen is almost the opposite, which is that when you don't have it, you almost know what it is more because you're so fixated on wanting to have it and you're trying to figure out, how do I get that? It's like, I believe that everyone else has this thing, and whether they have it or not, but then you're like, where do I get that thing? Where do I get it from if if I don't have it, which is kind of this belief of being worthy, that, believe it, that you deserve to have things.
Well, it's
Believe
part of the reason why I also wanted to define the term, because so far we've been describing it in terms of it, but we can't say what it is. If you don't know what it is, you can't get it. It's kind of like asking, what do you want to accomplish in your life? Well, I don't want to have this, or I don't want to have that. Okay, but what do you want? I'm not sure. Well, if you don't know, how are you going to get there?
Yeah.
It's that kind of a thing. So
Is
somehow
it,
we
is
have to
it,
define what the it is. What's that, Anne-Marie?
I was just wondering if it could be classed as just the belief in yourself.
Yeah, that's a good starting point.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Being worthy. Yeah.
Which means that it's tied directly to self-confidence
Mm-hmm.
and self-love and self-acceptance and self-forgiveness. Any self-hyphenated, you pretty much can put in that list.
So not much then.
Not much. No, it's a very short list.
Only kind of important.
Yeah, it's all pretty critical stuff. In fact, when you were talking about how very often when we're in that kind of a lax state, we can kind of see out there what it is that we want. But and there's truth to that. There's definite truth to that. But by the same token, I find that's when we have the least understanding of what it is that we want, because it's out there. We don't define it in terms of in here. We define it in terms of out there. So it's always unachievable. It's always out there.
Meaning that you feel like you don't find that you have, when you are envisioning something that you want for yourself, that you struggle to envision that clearly because it's not something that you've actually achieved. Is that what you're saying?
Well, partly, yeah. I think what I'm driving at is that if we're always looking at something that we truly understand, but we always understand it in terms of being out there, we never understand it in terms of it being in here, then we don't get there because we always keep it out there.
So I think it's interesting that you say that. I feel like there's also a lot of power in being able to use that as a motivator to create change.
Okay.
A lot of the change that occurs in a process like building up your self-worth, or in a process like trying to recorrect some of the mistakes you might be making with nutrition, or some of the beliefs that you have around exercise, that sometimes being able to envision, oh, but I want to be able to go out to a restaurant with my friends and not feel like I have to think about that all day. Or I want to be able to exercise some days, rest some days, and being able to give myself permission to adjust what my movement looks like based on how I'm feeling that day. That type of vision that you can articulate for yourself, or even like, I want to have a regular period and I want to do that. And I don't want to be irritable. I don't want to feel like I'm impacting the people around me in a way that is constantly based on me being really hungry or me being worried about what's going to happen with food. That some of those visions that we have around ourselves can be hugely motivating in the day-to-day. So when we're showing up and we're making a decision that in the moment feels really hard because we're breaking out of a habit that is based on a belief that we thought was keeping us safe or protecting us in some way, that having that motivator of, but I can imagine this scenario for myself, or maybe I don't think it's possible for me, and I think that that's for other people that make it look easy, but once we kind of have that vision for ourselves, I think that in some ways that actually can be motivating. And I think to your point though, also sometimes it does cause us to underweight the progress we've made so far, and that can also be disappointing, right? Is that like when and I absolutely fall prey to this, which is like, oh, well, I'm always seeing 5 steps ahead, and maybe this is what you meant. So like I'm not actually experiencing that, like I actually came 5 steps further from where I was the last time I was seeing 5 steps ahead. That can also be challenging because you're not acknowledging and staying, okay, well, this is where I am. And right, I don't always have to be healing. I don't always have to be a self-improvement project. So there is a balance and a push and pull there. But I think that in some of the moments where you are making changes towards something that you may or may not fully believe is possible for yourself, that can be a motivator in taking little steps along the way towards that change.
And some of it's about recognizing the steps you actually took. I mean, like
Exactly.
you said, if you're focused on 5 steps out and you're always 5 steps out, you take 3 steps, you're still 5 steps out. You've ignored the 3 steps you just took.
I think something that's helping me at the moment, because I'm entering this journey myself and have been sort of since the beginning of the year, is it's too big a thing to focus on now. So yes, I know I've come a long way in 6 months health wise, but I also know there's a long way to go. So what I tend to do is focus on my future me. So Anne-Marie, when she's say another 15 years older and mobility's going a bit, how much stronger I'm going to be and how much healthier I'm being. I'm only doing it for the future on me because I will see the difference and I'm focusing on that difference. So it's a weird one. I can't necessarily, even though I feel it now, I can't, it's too overwhelming now because there's too much change needs to happen. And I'm proud of myself, what I have done, but I have to focus on the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, because I think that the progress that you've had from the past 6 months in many ways that's all evidence that you're capable of getting to the point that you're envisioning in the 15 years, right? It's like all of those changes that maybe 6 months ago, it was hard for you to envision you even being here where you are right now. And that is all proof that in 6 months from now, you could even be further along than not only where you are right now, but maybe where you envision you'd be in 6 months. So I think that it's kind of, that's how they interrelate in my mind, at least.
And it's having those little celebrations, because I was thinking like 6 months ago, I would not have been able to walk down the cobbled streets of Rome with the heavy backpack on, holding children and whatever. I just wouldn't have been able to do it. I would have been in too much pain with my knees. Whereas now I was fine. Other bits of my body hurt after a while, but I was actually, my knees were okay. So it's those little wins and celebrating, going, actually, that has changed my life. And I know that I'm a lot stronger now. But when I'm pushing a weight and it's hard, I just go, future me. And that's my motivation.
Yeah. I love that.
Not a bad way to do it. Yeah, that's good. What else is going through your mind as you're listening to what Allison is saying, Anne-Marie?
I think and I can't say that this isn't for men as well, but just the whole hormonal battle that a woman has with their bodies month by month, and later on with perimenopause and menopause, is just how much your cravings and how much your food and your needs, did they change dramatically during the cycle? Because what might be working for when you post-period, pre-period, might not be working for. I'm just wondering how that works.
Yeah, so there are changes that can happen throughout the cycle in terms of there are certain phases of your cycle where your energy needs increase, and that it can be helpful to be aware of that so that if you are hungrier, like you would be able to meet your needs without feeling paranoid about, oh, but last week I didn't need this extra snack. And so then there are changes that will shift. And I think there are also definitely nuances in terms of how people respond differently. And so an example of this would be how you respond to a workout at different phases of your cycle. And for some people experientially, they might respond with a different energy level in a certain phase from somebody else. And so I think that there's a lot of power, and this is kind of going back to the theme that we had, in being able to tune into what's going to work for you. Because I know some people that are like, I know for sure dialed in that at this phase of my cycle, I'm feeling really strong and powerful, and in other phases I'm not. And that can actually vary. And a lot of it can also be psychological as well. Like we are capable of performing really, really well at any phase of our cycle, but the psychological aspects can be one of the biggest things to overcome. But our nutritional needs can shift throughout the phases of our cycle, and we can actually be more deliberate about that. And what I usually like to say is when what we often underestimate is that we're lucky, like anyone, woman, people who menstruate, we're really lucky in that we get that additional feedback loop that's almost like a vital sign to tell us how things are going with our health. And it's why with men, we actually don't catch energy availability issues as easily as with women, because with women, one of the first things that will happen or become dysregulated when we are experiencing issues with energy availability is our hormonal cycle. It's our menstrual cycle. And so if we find that it's like too short or too long, or we're skipping, or it's like the cycle length is changing, then those are all really helpful pieces of information back to us that allow us to adjust so that we know that we're correcting for some of those potential imbalances that we're creating. And for men, they don't always get that feedback loop as regularly in terms of, oh, I'm underfeeling and now my cycle is dysregulated, and how can I correct that? Or, oh, I might have been mismanaging my nutrition and my exercise. Now I can make adjustments accordingly. And so that's something that I actually think is a kind of like secret superpower of being able to have your cycle and knowing how to interpret it and be able to use it as a feedback loop.
There is a use for it then.
Yeah. I think that's the only use, right? Is there other? Is there?
There are probably a few gynecologists and so forth who might disagree with that, but I understand what you're saying.
And rightfully so. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
There are. I've heard that there are several other use cases. So.
Well, one thing that always happens when we do these shows is we become amazed at how quickly we run through an hour. And once again, it's happened because we've got about 3 minutes left in the program, and we have a few things we have to do before we can finish up. So first and foremost, for people who want to, especially for women who want to work with you or reach out to you or learn from you or share something with you or whatever, we got to tell them how to find you. Otherwise, it's not going to work too well.
Just lost into the ether.
That's right.
Well, of course. So I'm on Instagram. I'm at Allison Yamamoto, which is my full name. And I always love to hear from y'all. Any thoughts, questions, experiences, stories. I love to chat. And if you're interested in working with me, then you can find me at theallymethod.com, which is the website. There's free resources there. You can schedule a call. You can learn more about some of the topics that I covered today. And so I would love to hear from you there as well.
All right, good. Second thing, and we kind of were already doing this, but I always like to summarize it this way anyway, because one of the great, wonderful contributions that Anne Marie makes on the program is to be able to tie everything together from the listener, because I always am doing it from the host perspective, but she can listen from the listener's perspective because she came from the audience. That's where she originally comes from. So she's got that perspective. So Anne Marie, how are you tying it all together today in your mind that you can share with the audience?
I think for me, it would be about like looking after your body, and that's your mind, your heart, your body. It's the whole thing. Just going on a diet or cutting calories is not necessarily what's best for you, but just changing your whole mindset, and then your eating and your exercising, getting the whole thing right and adjusting it all together with support. A coach is very handy in that area. That kind of like sealed it for me.
Good stuff. I love it. Then finally, Allison, this is something I started doing in the last few years. I noticed something because we have all these guests like yourself who come onto the program, and very often they've been through traumas in their lives or, difficult situations, bad childhoods, whatever. And they went through some sort of a dark night of the soul, some kind of trauma that turned out to be a really rough situation, but they learned something from it. And then they learned something else, and they got some cool stuff, and they want to share it with the world. And so they end up embarking on a path like you're on, where you're sharing with the world all this stuff that has proven to be useful in your own life. And so you do podcasts and you go onto Instagram and you social media and you start sharing all this stuff. And that's where I noticed there was this big gap, because there's all this free stuff that you're putting out there and that we're putting out there, that all these people are putting out there, that you never know what's going to happen with it. I mean, it kind of gets consumed by some people, and they, sometimes you hear, but most often, they go off and do something with it. You don't even know what they did. You don't know what the result was. All these different ways you're helping people and you never know about it. And I said to myself, we can do something about that, because that's like this big, big gap in the narrative. So Allison, on behalf of those people you've never met, never seen, never will meet, never will see, who you've been helping in ways you didn't even know about, on their behalf, thank you for what you're doing, because you're making a difference in this world.
Wow, that means a lot to me. Thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And with that, we just ran out of time. It's amazing how that works. But Allison, thank you again for joining us. This has been really
thank
good
you for having me. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Really glad to have you. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.